Hola, you're listening to First Gen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. I am Priscilla, your host, the intuitive prima, and I'm so excited because today we have a part 2 with Crystal. We heard in part 1 your story, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. And today I'm really excited because we get to dive into your area of expertise. And so we're going to dive into holistic healing, which is what you bring into your practice.
Absolutely. Holistic healing is definitely my passion. I like to say that I became the therapist that I wish I would have had in my early adulthood. When I was in my 20s or so, I was going to therapy, and it was very much the traditional talk therapy approach, and I felt like, great that I was working on mental and emotional stuff there, there was value there. But I didn't feel like I was able to bring up like spiritual stuff or, so I felt like I was doing things on the side to supplement my therapy, right? I was out there studying Buddhism and
Yeah.
practicing yoga and, and learning some woo woo stuff, right? And it sucked feeling like I couldn't integrate the two. I really wished I would have had somebody or a therapist back then that would have invited all of that into the sessions, So that's what I do.
Yeah. So exciting. Yeah, because it's like a transformation that you're going through. Like individuals that are starting to dig in to what they went through and how they move forward. It's like there's so much that happens. It's not just these conversations, right? In between, before, during, after. So I thought that maybe we could start off with talking a little bit about what is the meaning of holistic. At some point, I felt like it meant just like a spa and a retreat, but now I know that it means so much more than that. So can you give us a little bit more insight into what is holistic healing, or what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. So holistic essentially means the whole self, all aspects of you. And
Okay.
recognizing that everything is interconnected. And so I usually explain it to my clients in a very specific way to help them get a framework for like what it actually means or looks like. So I have 8 different things that go into holistic, and I'm certain people can come up with more, but these are the ones that I see most often in my practice that have relevance to the entire individual. So
Okay.
most people know about mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual, right? Like those are the typical things we hear about when we're talking about, mind, body, spirit, right? So that those kind of
Yes.
encapsulate that. However, not a lot of people talk about the relevance of our culture, of our environment, the social aspects of our lives, and also occupation, so all of that kind of creates our whole self. And yeah, I kind of systematically go through those 8 things with my clients one by one and try to get a feel for, is there harmony there? Or most of my clients tend to hyper fixate on one occupation in particular, right? And
Yeah.
they're pouring so much energy into occupation that they're neglecting all the other 7 aspects of self, or a good portion of them. So that's usually how I like to describe it.
I see. Yeah, that makes so much sense because even I think like I remember someone saying, you're trying to do so much, but have you slept 8 hours? Have you drank water? Have you had 3 meals a day? And so it's like, I mean, it feels so simple, but honestly, in our day to day, sometimes it isn't, right? Because even in part 1, we were talking about like masculine energy. I think it's kind of like, oh, I need to get through all of these 10 things on my to-do list and then I can eat, or then I can sleep, or maybe I'll sleep less, maybe I won't. And so I love that you're saying like kind of all of them are interconnected and they all play a role in how you're able to move forward or like, go about your days.
Yeah, and it can feel overwhelming for sure to like even look at
Yeah.
that entire list and be like, I have to juggle all of this. Like, what? How am I going to do that? Right. So I try to
Yeah.
minimize that sense of overwhelm as best as possible by letting them know, like, we're not going to do it all at once. Like, this
Okay.
isn't an overnight process, right? It's not like 3 sessions and you're good, right? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Oftentimes I'm working with my clients long term. Like, I've had some clients that have been with me for 3 years, some that get everything they need in 6 months. That's okay too. But the ones that stick with me for a long time, it's because they're really committed to creating lifestyle shifts, right? And that takes time
Mm, mhm.
because you're going
Mhm.
to be tweaking one thing at a time, and making that a habit and trying to figure out along the way what's getting in the way of you creating that lifestyle shift, and then gradually adding onto it and
Right.
doing more and adding more, and until you get to a place where you're able to look back and be like, wow, yeah, I feel like an entirely different person because what I wake up and do with my entire day is drastically different than what I would have done like a year ago. So
Mhm.
it's lifestyle shifts that create this. And that takes time.
Yeah. Would you say, because I like how you said like gradually adding on, is that a version of expanding your capacity, or is it shifting like focus into different
Mhm.
areas and not fully concentrating, or a combination of both?
Yeah,
What's your experience with that?
I would say it's for the purpose of expanding, because what people tend to do is they want like the results quickly, right? They're like, I'm sick of
Yeah.
suffering. I don't want to feel this stress anymore. I don't want, right? So they're like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. But if I'm telling
Mhm.
them a lot of those like you just named some of the foundational things, right? Like, how are you sleeping? How are you eating? Are you having enough water? Right? Like, just those, if you try to tackle all of them at once, like, okay, suddenly I need to make sure I'm getting that
Mm,
8 hours of sleep every single night. And okay, I need to make sure I'm also drinking the 60 ounces of water every single day. And on top of that, I need to make sure I'm eating the 3 meals and snacking in between and like whatever, right? That is so overwhelming to suddenly like wake up one day and be like, I'm doing it all. Right?
yeah.
So
Yeah. That's
you
true.
gradually expand. So what we're doing is we
Okay.
want to start to formulate habits in your life, make them second nature, make this like your ritual. This is just what I do now. But you can't do that
Mhm.
until you get very comfortable integrating this thing into your life and practicing it and repeating it over and over and over until it becomes that habit, until it becomes second nature. And now, once you're comfortable with that one, great, let's add the next one to it and continue to expand.
Okay. So it's like gradual and it's expansion. You mentioned something that I think is funny. It's like, yeah, we're always looking for the magic pill, right? Like just what's the one little thing that I need to shift and like that everything will be okay. So when let's say someone comes to you and is like, okay, I'm tired of living this way. I need some help. What's one of the first things that you do with them? Is it go through the wheel and assess where they're at in each of the spots?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I might look at the
Okay.
wheel to begin with to get a feel for where they're pouring too much energy in. And
Mm,
then to get a feel
mhm,
for, okay, what are the more foundational things that we can start with? So usually our physical health is very foundational. So starting
mm,
there can work wonders, because yeah, if we can start to regulate your sleep, make sure you're getting good restful sleep, you're going to have more energy to pour into the other areas, right?
I
Or
see. Yeah.
sometimes we'll recognize, okay, like maybe it's not necessarily the physical health. Maybe you've got a good foundation there already, but maybe it's your mental and emotional energies. Like, if you're very chaotic up here in the head, right? And it's causing your emotions to run wild and you don't know how to regulate all of that. Okay, maybe we need to pour energy into those to get that in line so that then you can start to pour
Mhm,
energy into the others. So, yeah, I definitely like to use the framework just to get an idea of what is already steady and solid and what's sort of lacking and what areas are you lacking. And
mhm,
we sort of kind of work from there, and we, similar to like the chakras, you're supposed to start from the root and work
mhm.
your way all the way up. similar to that, like
Yeah.
there, you kind of have to pay attention to what is most prevalent right now. What is the thing that's like getting in the way the most? And if we can like
Mhm.
steady that first, well, then we're going to be able to sort of move up the hierarchy and figure out what else can get done to ultimately get you to a place where you're living your most authentic life.
I see. Yeah. Do you think that this also ties into part one in the sense that some people will focus all their energy in one area, thinking once I'm at a certain point in this area, I can expand into the others?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah, for sure.
vocation, let's say, or profession? Mm,
Yeah.
hmm.
Oh, that's what I see the most in regards to occupation. So, a good portion of my clients, they're either students working toward their careers, or they're the individuals that work their butts off to get to the career and, like, for all intents and purposes, should be happy now that they achieve the career, but suddenly they're like burnt out and more anxious than ever because they were just so used to pouring too much energy to getting there, and now they don't know how to turn
Yeah.
that off. Now they're pouring so much energy into sustaining the career or moving up in the career or whatever it is. They never learned how to pay attention to the rest of themselves. So I
Mm,
see that a lot. People just pouring way too much into the one area. It can be really difficult to stop doing it, right? Or even realize you're doing it to begin with.
yeah. Yeah. Wouldn't you say like it sometimes feels like within us it feels very real that we need to pour that much energy into a certain area? How do
Yeah.
you go about maybe breaking that up for them or showing them otherwise? Because I think, like, for example, in my experience, in my career, that's what I felt like. I had to burn out. I thought that there was no other way, that was being a good worker, that was being a good human, essentially, that was my purpose, to do good in my job, to get ahead. And the freshman experience, like, you carry so much of the expectations and the weight and the pressure and comparison. So there's so much that's like impulsing you, let's say. How do you help people slow that impulse or that pressure down a little bit?
Yeah. That's where I love really doing values work. So when we bring
Mm,
values into these sessions, I go through an exercise where I actually list 100 different values. I'll like read them out and the meaning of this value, and I'll have the clients, they use a sort of a list. They have like a document in front of them. Sometimes they're writing it out in person if I'm in person. Sometimes they're typing it if it's virtual, but they will categorize that value. Is it the most important? Is it very important?
mm,
Is it neutral? Is it not very important or not important at all? Right. So they put it in whatever
okay.
category they feel like it fits best in. So we can isolate what are your most important values. And it gives us so much insight. And we start to recognize that the thing you're pouring so much energy into, or the reason why you're pushing yourself in certain areas, usually kind of contradicts your most important values.
Mm,
So
mm-hmm.
it's that's usually what snaps them out of it, when it's like, oh man, you're pouring so much into your career, right? And thinking like this is going to be the thing that maybe opens up the door so you can have more freedom, right? Financial freedom, maybe, so that you can spend more family
Yeah.
time, right? If family is one of your most
Mm-hmm.
important values. However, well, you're pouring so much energy into trying to achieve financial freedom so that one day you can have more time for family. But like, tell me how that's been working for you if you now lost a couple of really important family members, and now you have to
Mm,
process all that lost time. And the fact that you were
yeah.
neglecting those relationships because you were pouring so much into this. Right. So it's sort of
Yeah.
that shock value sort of thing. Like, oh, like I've had clients straight up tell me, like, you did not have to read me like that, Crystal. Like, what but it's so
Yeah.
beautiful what values can do for us, the insight that it can give us. And that again, it can snap us into reality and make us realize like, yeah, some of what I'm doing, it's contradicting my values, not aligning me with them.
Mm-hmm. I see. I'm wondering, like, if you were to zoom out and in terms of with your clients, what do you think are driving emotions? Like, I'm thinking of fear a lot. Is that something that comes up a lot in your sessions? Um,
Absolutely.
as a driver? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I like to say fear of the unknown is one of the most prevalent fears out
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
So many people are uncomfortable with it, right? Um, in regards to what may be driving it, I mean, it's different for different individuals. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's past experiences in their life where maybe they receive messages, and now it's become sort of unconscious beliefs that, failure is unacceptable, or that
Mm-hmm.
to fail at something means that, you're not going to have a stable life, or you're not going to be happy, or you're not going to, they tend to catastrophize and go to these like wild places. And so we have to sort of
Yeah.
figure out, how do you lean into that fear in order to gradually dismantle it, right? Like, let's lean into it and let's say, okay, yeah, you fail at this thing, but is it really going to lead to that like awful outcome? Or will you realistically have different opportunities to continue figuring out how to achieve what you're trying to achieve, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we really have to get in there and try to figure out, like, to what extent is that fear just becoming this big crazy thing that isn't real, and to what extent
Yeah.
are you allowing reality to set in and being practical and taking a good look at that fear and saying, like, okay, that actually probably won't be as uncomfortable as I'm making it out to be. Like, it'll still suck for sure, but like, I can survive that, right? So yeah, you have to kind
Mm-hmm.
of figure out where it came from to begin with, and it's different for every person, and start to figure out, how do I dismantle
Mm-hmm. Okay. It feels like you're aligning people and kind of like they're finding balance and alignment as they go, right?
that?
Because it's kind of like, let's say emotions, if they're skewed one way or the other, it's kind of like rebalancing, and that unlocks something different from them, and then kind of moving forward like that. That's so
Mhm.
beautiful. And I imagine you get to witness a lot of transformation in people's lives.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's such a beautiful
Mm-hmm.
process. Yeah, I find,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of not just the duality of life, but also helping people recognize that oftentimes it's not just duality, right? It's not just black and white, right? That a lot of
Right.
life falls in a gray area. So
Mm-hmm.
I find it so fun, maybe because I'm a Libra or whatever, and I'm always trying to find balance, or like, I'm always
Mm-hmm.
looking for, like, well, sometimes there's a middle ground. It's not all this, it's not all that, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and there's there's a lot of gray area. And so it's
Yeah.
helping people
Yeah.
recognize that, and yeah, and stop being on the extreme ends of the spectrum. Let's find that happy middle
Mm-hmm.
ground. And it's there where, yeah, I get to
Mm-hmm.
see when people give themselves permission to accept that and to realize that that's usually the
Mm-hmm.
reality of things. That's where I see the most growth, the most transformation, the most like beauty in people and the world.
Mm, yeah. What I picture is like someone is, driving really fast down one lane. And so like if there were a lot of lanes to open up at the same time, it would be overwhelming. So I can see how it's so helpful to have someone there with you, and like understand that you don't have to drive in each, you don't have to go full force in each one right away, right? Like you get to do it slowly and as needed. And like I also imagine like you're able to kind of have a bird's eye view, of like, okay, here's where you should go next, or this is maybe what is would be easier for you to lean into in this moment of your life. So
Mhm.
that sounds really awesome. And
Yeah,
it sounds different than maybe typical, or not typical, how would we call it? Maybe traditional therapy, in the sense that you're there to maybe process a certain type of trauma, and it kind of keeps you in that lane, right? So can you talk a little bit about maybe what led you to do holistic healing as part of your practice?
absolutely. So I essentially became the therapist that I wish I would have had when I was growing up. right? I started therapy at 15 years old, been in and out since. But
Mm,
it was in my 20s in particular that I was, back in therapy at the time. And I was in that traditional talk therapy setting. And yeah, I just felt
mhm,
like I couldn't bring all aspects of myself into that space. So I was doing the therapy, but then on the side, studying Buddhism, studying yoga, like practicing all these coping skills or figuring
mm.
out like what are the things that help me feel whole, and what are those lifestyle shifts and like what do I need as an individual. And so it kind of sucked to feel like,
Yeah.
like I couldn't fuse the two together. Like I had this side of me and I had that side of me, right? So by the
Mhm.
time that I went into grad school, I was already starting to think about like, wouldn't it be amazing if there were therapists out there that did both, right? That offered the talk therapy part of things and like that practical approach to mental health, but also invited in the woo woo, right? And so it kind of worked out
Yeah.
perfectly. This was one of those moments where the universe sort of just provided the exact thing I needed at the exact right moment. So I had started looking for a grad school, and um, I was looking around trying to get a feel for where do I want to apply? What do I want to study exactly? I knew I wanted to be a therapist, but I did, there's so many ways that you can get there. I was like, I don't even know which
Yeah.
path to take. But I ended up finding a school. It's a small private school that was only about 20 minutes away from where I lived, called University of the West. And they essentially blended East and West. So they had the Western
Mm.
evidence based approaches to psychology that they taught you, right? So you got your degree, your master's in psychology as a marriage and family therapist. But they did this by blending in some Eastern wellness practices as well. So it was a Buddhist university.
Mm.
And they also had a divinity program. So you would walk around the school and you would see the students in the divinity program in the full blown garb walking around looking like monks, like real monks. And
Mm.
and so it was so cool to have classes with them and to learn all of this spiritual stuff and to also on the other side be learning, the Western approaches to psychology. And so it just kind of reinforced this notion in my mind that this is what I'm meant to be doing. So since graduating and starting my practice 2 years ago, I also started a networking community called the Holistic Healers Community.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
that's where we have started to invite anybody in the holistic realm. So lots of different modalities. I've had the
Okay.
pleasure of meeting so many interesting people and learning about
Mhm.
modalities I had no clue existed. So I will let clients know, like if we're working in an area where something comes up where it seems like it's sort of like energy based or chakra based or something, right? I may teach them about the chakras because I can do that much. But then I'll also say, hey,
Mhm.
have you ever tried Reiki? And like let me give you referrals to people who I know and trust that are Reiki masters, right? So they can take you
Yeah.
through that experience. And I love it when they actually go and get it done and then they come back in and it's like, great, let's talk about it. How did that work for you? Right. So I've
Yeah.
recommended clients to
Yeah.
go, whether it's Reiki or herbalism or acupuncture or massage therapy, like so many other modalities. Cause I'm like, you know what? Like I'm not gonna gatekeep healing, right? I'm not gonna be like, it's here that it
Mhm.
happens and only here.
Mhm.
Like, no, let's try it all. And let's
Yeah.
see what works for you
Yeah.
the most as an individual.
Mm. I love that so much because I think that's so important. It's like giving people different experiences of healing too. I think sometimes certain modalities get highlighted more, like therapy, traditional therapy, let's say. However, if someone tries that and they don't feel like it works, I do see some people feel discouraged, and then they're like, oh, that's just not for me, and they may stay stuck. And so it's so beautiful to then be like, actually, what you're working through right now could really benefit from a sound bath. No say you need to get into your body, or some Reiki, like you mentioned, Akashic records. Like you're really looking for your purpose right now. Let's dive into that, or let me refer you to someone who does that, which I think is so cool because it's like expanding the transformation that they're already having and bringing in, I call them like the correct avatars, you know, like, or Avengers, not avatars, the right Avengers, to really help you move into that next version of you that you're looking for, or that they're looking for.
Especially those who have been in and out of therapy for a while and are just kind of like, I don't know, like it's not working for me. And maybe it's the therapy style,
Yeah.
or maybe it's, maybe it was the therapist themselves. I don't know. Like I like being very real with them and saying it might not be therapy at all. And I see this the
Mm,
most when what they're working on is like deeply rooted in the unconscious. Like if it's
mm,
unconscious
mhm.
stuff that happened, like that originated from childhood, right? So it's been deeply rooted there for a long time. Then, talking about it on the conscious level might not be very effective. And we can make some lifestyle
Yeah.
shifts, sure. Like, and that can maybe help you cope with whatever's coming up for you a little bit better. Absolutely, but like it's not going to completely uproot whatever's going on in the unconscious, right? So that's where I'd be like,
Mhm.
hey, maybe hypnotherapy might work really well, right? Or maybe neuro linguistic programming that specifically works with the unconscious, right? Things like that. Like, so I'll be honest with them and let them know, like, if you want to keep seeing me, absolutely, like the space is here for you if you need it. But I'll let them know I'm not 100% certain that therapy is the thing, you know? And
Mhm.
maybe try this
Mhm.
other thing instead and see what comes of that. And of course, you can come back in here and keep processing what happens there. But I don't know if therapy in and of itself is going to be enough or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I appreciate is that you provide the container to come back, because sometimes those modalities, there are things that happen, like let's say 1 hour session, and then you process as much as you can and experience as much as you do, and then you're kind of left to integrate on your own. But it sounds like you provide a sustaining container of like coming back and processing with you, you know? And I think that's really cool too, because you hold their story, but then you're able to like allow them to process and integrate within that, you know? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I see you. That's really cool, because then it's kind of like there's always the a base to come back to that understands where you're coming from, but now there's new information that you can come in and integrate. I know you started your business 2 years ago. Did you start your did you start practicing 2 years ago, or is that just when you started your own business?
That's when I started my own business. So I've been in
Okay.
practice for 8 years now.
8
And
years. Okay.
yeah, initially I started in community mental health. So I had been working with kids in the foster system. So working with a lot of trauma,
Mm,
depression, anxiety, things like that, which are my specialties now, because I have a lot of
mhm,
experience there. And then when I had my son, so community mental health was really rough. I was working easily 50 hours a week in that position.
mm,
And when I had my
mhm.
son, I decided I really wanted to cut back on work. I wanted to try to be more present. And that's, it worked out perfectly because that's right when I got licensed. And so I decided to
Um,
go into a group private practice. So I was working under somebody
mhm,
else for a while within their business, but it allowed me to cut my hours down to less than half of what I had been doing before. So that was
mm,
great. And I did that for about a year or so, maybe a year and a half before I was like, I think I could do this on my own, and again,
okay.
continue to cut back on my hours even further. And, instead of having
Mm,
that split fee where I'm now giving a portion of my earnings to, the group private practice owner, like I get to keep it all. So
yeah,
work less, make a little
yeah,
more. So that's when I decided to launch
okay.
my practice. I really wanted to focus on targeting individuals who wanted to take that more spiritual or holistic approach to therapy. And at
I
the group
see.
practice, they were great, but sort of generalists. Like whoever came in that
Mhm,
had availability that aligned with yours, like you got that case, right? And I was like, great. I met
right.
some great people that way too. But again, I really wanted to work with like my specific niche and like the type of approach that like just ooh, makes my heart soar. You know?
Yes. Okay. So as we wrap this episode up, I love to ask, what have you learned about yourself in doing this work, in
Mhm.
focusing on holistic healing?
Yeah. Oh man, I feel like just so much self-awareness in regards to like what works for me.
Mm,
So even that idea that different modalities can be just as effective, if not sometimes more effective than therapy. That's sort of a new concept to me. Like I said before, yes, I was in therapy and
mm,
I was also, doing yoga or studying Buddhism, all of that. But there was almost this sense of like not wanting to fully admit that like the therapy in and of itself wasn't the thing that was working, right? The most. Um,
mhm.
because I wanted to be a therapist and I didn't want to admit that. I didn't want to be like, well,
Right.
that's not, it's not enough. So it's just coming around to this place of fully admitting and embracing and accepting that that's okay. It's okay if this one
Mhm.
thing in and of itself isn't the end all be all, isn't going to get me to exactly where I want to be. And it's okay to
Yeah.
continue to explore other modalities. It's okay to get out there and say, like, let me try this, let me do that, let me do it all. And I think the most
Mhm.
important recognition there is as we go through phases of life, like different things will resonate a little bit more than others, right? Like there were phases in life
Yeah.
where I did need to talk things through. And there are other phases of life
Yeah.
where there's specific experiences that I'm trying to process where something else entirely different is going to be the thing that like hits the spot the most, right? So I think
Right. Mhm.
that knowledge and accepting that fully has been like the best thing that I've learned along the way in
Mm.
regards to my own self growth and healing.
Mhm. My next question is, what have you learned about the first gen community through doing this work and through clients that you have that are first gen?
Mm. I think the most profound realization there, and something that's often challenging trying to work through with the first gen community, there's still like this stigma, not just with mental health, but even more so with the woo woo stuff, right? So if I start
Mm.
talking to them
Mhm.
about Reiki, about tarot, about these different modalities, like ooh, if we get into Kundalini activation process, like so many of them are like what are you asking me to do, right? Like that, like they start to go to this
Mm.
headspace of like, well, no, that's taboo or that's the devil's work or that I don't want to dive into that. That's
Mhm.
like they're scared. They're scared that they're like
Yeah.
opening up doors or portals or something if they try this
Yes.
stuff, right? And it's
Yeah.
so baffling to me sometimes because I'm just like, no, like I promise it's beautiful. And I'm just like, you know, but I realize that that's a big barrier with the first gen
Mhm.
community and BIPOC individuals is that that belief system is there and deeply intertwined. And I get it, there's
Mhm.
our culture is also, there's a long, deep rooted history when it comes to like religion there, right? And
Right.
Catholicism and,
Mhm.
all of that. So I get it. I get why that's a thing. So part of getting to this space where we're able to get to the healing to begin with and receptivity to trying all these other modalities is first moving past that barricade, that barrier of them not
Okay.
understanding what this stuff is to begin with.
Ooh, yeah, that's so real. Like I think there's a lot of hesitation and you use the word portals. That's exactly what I think of, is like cuando haces esas cosas, like when you're doing those things, estás abriendo portales, right? Like you're opening doors. And previous to your episode, there's going to be an episode about religion and also like being spiritual
Mhm.
and awakening, so it pairs perfectly because yeah, I think like we're starting to dive into those topics. And in the community that I created, like the goody has gone bad ish community, I call us like baby black sheep because everyone's like in that like okay, dipping my toe in tarot and oracle decks and stuff like that, you know. I brought in like an astrologist to talk to them. So it's like, let's experience these things together and lose the fear of the unknown, you know, because I think sometimes that's what's happening. It's like I don't know that, so I want to stay away from it, you know. But yeah, it's so cool that you combine both. I really love that, and thank you so much for taking your time to come on here and talk to us about holistic healing, and even diving a little bit into your framework, you know, and like giving us a sneak peek of what that looks like and how you work that into your work. I would love if you could just mention a little bit about what you do and then like where people can find you. And I will, of course, include that information in the description. But yeah, just so that they can hear it from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, licensed marriage and family therapist. So, I provide one on one therapy services. I work primarily with adults. And if you're wanting that holistic framework, that is what I do. So, if you want to explore your own healing through the sessions here, but also maybe get recommended to other things that might align with your journey, other modalities. I've got that entire network. So lots of individuals that I know and trust that
Mhm.
provide other services that might really also resonate with clients that come my way. Um, and you can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Crystal Venegas LMFT, and that's also my website, crystalvenegaslmft.com. And then my podcast, Holistic Healers Community Podcast. If you want to learn about other healing modalities, we interview lots of different people in
Mhm.
regards to what it is they do, their businesses, how they got onto their healing journeys, things like that.
Yay! All right. Thank you so much, Crystal, for your time, for your information, for what you do. If you guys found this episode helpful, please make sure that you share it with your amigas, amigos, amigues. And we hope that you guys have a good rest of your day. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you, Crystal, for recording part one and part two with us. I really, really appreciate it. Your time, your energy, and everything. So thank you so much.